Hey there, friends. Welcome back to Hawkeye Speaks. Thanks for joining me today. I want to chat a little bit about the climate with you. Why am I getting into talking about this climate situation? Well, I've actually studied land management and soil health for several years, and the entire issue is very important to me. And I am myself personally biased towards health and wellness, and I would like to see a healthier world, a healthy planet, healthy individuals, families, organisms, all around. I'm biased towards life and health. So I've kind of always been that way in the sense of tried to keep it positive, and have been able to, through doing my own inner work, for the most part, maintain that journey. And it is a constant journey, of course. But then when I was very, very fortunate to kind of stumble upon Alan Savory's book, Holistic Management, that really opened some doors for me. And I had just before that begun studying soil science and soil health, starting with Korean natural farming. And some of these things, as I delved into them, they opened up further doors for me. The light bulb started to go on, having these big realizations. And the interesting thing with both of them, the soil science and the holistic land management, which is important to share, I feel, and I want to share it because I have this feeling that I wish people would have shared this with me, is that I was already gardening and farming and doing organic, and like I say, already biased towards life as much as I could remain in the positive, and doing these things, composting, growing, moving towards growing organically. I used to be involved in horticulture professionally, and always moving more towards organic and natural, and thinking about the science of what's going on in the black bag. I used to say we would grow in these bags, and thinking about the living system of the soil before the knowledge was really there. And similarly, I lived out here on rangeland. I'm pointing that way because there's thousands of acres of open land all around me that are nothing but sagebrush. And meanwhile, I've been able to create a forest here in the 1 acre that I have behind the house. And the permaculture dream is being realized, but I didn't really get the whole picture. I didn't understand ecology yet. Ecology is, of course, the study of ecosystems, but it involves us, the participant, our ability to be receptive to this knowledge. And I guess I wasn't ready yet, but also, like I say, I don't feel like the information is being handed down. It's kind of compartmentalized in these different niches, which is an unfortunate thing about this modern Western culture that we're living in. So focused on specialization and compartmentalization. So I lived on these rangelands for 20 years and never heard the story that Alan Savory tells, that all of the prairie lands, herb lands, and grasslands of the world were built and maintained by the herd and predator system. Ruminant animals that kept bunched up tightly in the herd due to fear of predation, and then they moved regularly because of the predators, but also because they dung and urinate evenly. So this is critical, and another thing that happens is that they trample evenly. And this is the herd system. This is what Alan Savory teaches about. And still to this day, it's a great mystery to many. It's not happening. And even though here in New Mexico, a great portion of the farmers and ranchers are familiar with Savory's work, particularly ranchers that are long time been working with cattle. They're all familiar with Savory's work, but there's a general opinion that it won't work here, or they just don't quite have the pieces there, and they don't have the tools to implement it, nor do they have the impetus. Why should they? They have the nice fertile lands to keep their cattle, and they take them up to the mountains in the summer. And the system of society that we're kind of engaging in is not encouraging In fact, it is disencouraging Savory's work if you follow the picture. So why am I talking about climate? Well, the climate situation is just clearly, I hope everyone can see that it's turning out to be a really nasty picture already. And many people were saying a few years ago, as we got into the last situation that happened, that the next big situation that's going to happen is going to be lockdowns and mandates around climate stuff. Okay, so many people have already said this years ago. We've been well warned that there will be lockdowns, green passes, restrictions on your freedoms based on the climate crisis. So that's a very big concern. And what I see, there's essentially four camps, not just the two. The climate crisis exists. It's caused by fossil fuels. We need to do whatever. We stop oil now. There's the stop oil climate crisis camp. And then it's a complete hoax. Climate change, global warming is a hoax camp. And really, the media would have you believe that most of the world, you're only allowed to believe this, but it's actually, at best, 50-50. But an interesting thing to point out is that what I found is that the climate crisis is made up of young people, and people, what I see is a lot more ideologues than really informed people. What I've seen on this side, you get angry people that are just anti-government, that say, oh, it's all a hoax. But it's also loaded with professors and intellectuals and just well-minded people that have looked deeply into the issue. So that's something to consider. But we don't just have these two camps. We also, of course, have the people that just ignore the issue 100%. They don't care. They're not involved, and they don't want to participate in the debate at all. And again, we don't have to size out these groups necessarily just to say that they exist. And then we have a fourth group, which is people that are actively mitigating environmental conditions through improving soil health, land management with positive results. So they've always been around. This fourth group has always been around. People that have always, throughout all of the history of humankind, realized that when you cut down too many big trees out of the forest and you overgraze, this is a human management problem, not ruminant animals don't overgraze. Remember, because ruminants are part of originally the herd and predator system. And overgrazing is something that happens, but it's really a human management problem. So anyway, for millennia, people have known that when we go in the forest and cut down too many big trees and we overgraze the land, we will see catastrophic changes. And there's actually, even in the town south of here, Silver City, there's a wonderful mural on a wall that depicts the story of exactly what I just said, because it actually happened there, that they foolishly, in some ways, built their main street right in a large arroyo that was the wash out of the mountains, the floodplain wash. But of course, they hadn't seen it flow in many years. Probably because the soil health was doing great and the land was able to absorb the water in the proper cycling, full hydrological cycle. And then, as many people were moving there in the late 1800s, and they built this main street, 1890 or so, they did just that. They cut down many of the big trees out of the forest, and they brought in many sheep that were not properly managed or not well managed. And then they saw catastrophic flooding, which actually washed the entire main street away and created a large ditch or, a ravine. And it's still, to this day, it's there, and it's called the Big Ditch. And we're over 120 years later, and it's now just finally being kind of cleaned up and turned into a natural area. It was really trashed for many years, because even some of the buildings had fallen into it a bit, and it was just a trashed zone. But now, 120-something years later, 130 years later, we're cleaning it up and putting in some walking paths, and There is a beautiful mural there that is a wonderful testament of taking responsibility for this type of situation that happens that we just don't normally see. So, why am I talking about climate change? What's up with holistic management? What's up with soil health? Well, I studied all these things, but then what I ended up finding is that the solutions have already been around. Savory put this book out initially in the 70s, and then the fourth edition that I have, I believe, was 1988, which happens to be the same year that Bill Mollison's Permaculture Bible came out, and a lot of other critical work, really, around that time. Lynn Margulis and James Lovelock had come up with the Gaia hypothesis back in the 60s and collaborated with Margulis in the 70s. And they were promoting the idea, she was speaking about it publicly and lecturing, that the Earth is a living system. The temperature, the oxidation rate, and the atmospheric gaseous conditions are regulated by living organisms. That's what Lynn Margulis said. Okay? Lynn Margulis and James Lovelock studied atmospheric gases. That's how he got into the picture. That's why he came up with the Gaia hypothesis originally, because what he found is that the atmospheric gaseous conditions of our living planet here exist in anomalous conditions. Now, I'm not a chemist myself, but if any of you just took basic chemistry, even you'll understand that these different gases in a laboratory setting have they have their, I forget the word for it. They have their state, their equilibrium states that they go to, but in our atmosphere, they're anomalous. They would not be able, something is causing them to be able to mix in conditions that they would not be able to in a laboratory setting, such as the mixtures of argon and methane and oxygen, what our atmosphere is made up of. And that's a good little sidetrack there for 1 second, is that I ask young people all the time, I ask anyone, I even have a video about it, do you know what the composition of the atmosphere is? Do you know what percentage carbon is? Because we're told that carbon, this camp over here says that carbon from fossil fuels is causing a warming of the planet into catastrophic climate change. And 99.9% of the people couldn't explain the rational science behind that. They couldn't tell you how CO2 in the atmosphere causes warming. They could maybe give some ideas, but I, in my estimation, I don't find most of the people to be well informed on the scientific matters of it. What Margulis and Lovelock were saying is that these conditions are regulated by living organisms. That's why they're anomalous. That's why we have, in the percentages that we do, we have the percentage of carbon in the atmosphere. The carbon that's going to kill us all is 0.04, 400 parts per million. And plants love up to 1,200, 1,500 parts per million. And the data that proves warming from carbon in the atmosphere, CO2, is shaky at best. But the Earth may be warming. The Earth may be warming indeed, but it may also be cooling. This is the thing. It's been very hot here this summer, very hot indeed, and the monsoon rains haven't come. That's a rather serious thing, because there are still some subsistence farmers in the world, which means that if the year's rains don't come, they die. And most of the people in the modern world, they're concerned with their first world problems. That's not really in their train of thinking, and a lot of times we don't even have an access to help people like that need help. That's a whole nother issue. So Lovelock studied atmospheric gases, found that they exist in anomalous conditions. Well, what are the conditions? It's 0.04 carbon, okay? And then the main constituents of the atmosphere is nitrogen. 77% of the atmosphere is nitrogen. 21% is oxygen. This only leaves 2%, and those 2% are the greenhouse gases. And out of the greenhouse gases, actually, 95% of that is water. Now, I'm not an atmospheric scientist myself, but this is what individuals such as Walter Yenny, with the soil carbon sponge, ideas and lectures, plenty of material available. Please check them out. Walter Jehne, Jehne, and Christine Jones, The Liquid Carbon Pathway. Okay, talking about how this gaseous exchange works and how the mitigation of the environmental conditions actually works. I mean, this is what Margulis was adding to Lovelock's work from a biological sense. Margulis is the master biologist to me. That's where I study biology, really, as I read her books and I've listened to every single thing available that I could find that she ever had to say. And so, in any case, we have these different groups. We have, oh, it's a crisis, it's a hoax, don't pay any attention at all. And then another group that has been actively trying to improve environmental conditions always. I mean, these are regenerative producers, the people that understand basically that all new energy comes from the sunlight and we capture it in the form of photosynthesis. So, the big reason why I'm speaking this, I know I'm jumping around, I'll get right back to what I was saying a second ago, but the big reason why I'm speaking about this is that I actually feel like all of these three groups are they're in the pockets. If you yourself think it's a climate crisis, or you yourself think it's a climate hoax, I need to ask you to please consider that I think you're both in the pockets of the technocratic oligarchs, which are the rich people that want to have everything for themselves and enforce mandates and regulations which will affect poor people, not rich people. Poor people will get the effects of the mandates, the restrictions, the food shortages, and the rich people will be flying their private jets and their $1 million yachts around. I mean, and I hope that's pretty obvious when you actually look into it. If you just in yourself, if you're someone on the climate crisis, camp, and you think that we need to mandate the use of fossil fuels, yes, I beg of you to please consider that that will only affect poor people, and it will make creating life on this planet much, much harder. And it's all part of an anti-human agenda in a way. And that's why I say that I'm very pro-life, and I'm not talking about an abortion issue. I'm talking about pro-life to the absolute maximum, this camp here, this fourth camp. So what I'm encouraging all of us to think about is that it's a climate crisis, it's a climate hoax, and also just ignoring the picture, that's also called complacency, being complicit. You can just be used. So all three of these groups, because climate hoax, it doesn't serve a purpose. I mean, we've got too many wild conspiracy theories that people can't back up. Some of them, I think, if you actually talk to people, they might be able to back up what they've said, but other people, they'll just want to cancel you. We're living in the days of cancel culture, and that's another thing. I mean, I ask any of you if what I'm saying is worthwhile at all, then please share it, because the algorithm certainly won't. So, why am I talking about all this? Well, I studied soil health, I studied land management, I found out that ruminant animals can heal desertifying lands, that lands that are continually trending towards desertification, which is like all of the arid lands of the world, because we've completely upset this natural balance of herd and predator system. And even though we have domesticated ruminants that we could replicate the system with, utilizing biomimicry, we're oftentimes just not doing that. So I learned of that. I learned of the miracle of holistic management and holistic thinking, how to stop focusing on the individual plans and ideas and put a holistic goal at the forefront. I studied not just Margulis and Lovelock and the guide hypothesis, but I studied biology in general, studied the work of Victor Schauberger, where he was, again, 100 years ago, telling us about hydrological cycles, the full hydrological cycle, as we envision rain, going and soaking into the land, benefiting the earth and the plants, and then coming back up to transpiration. And the broken cycle is when it just comes down, it doesn't soak in, it just runs off and bakes off, and goes right back up. And we have a broken hydrological cycle. So in observing the climate, as I began to say that, yes, we've had very, very hot temperatures here this summer, but we also had extremely cold temperatures in the winter. So that's why it's not really global warming, if it gets really cold too, that's just called erratic weather. And really the deal that I've learned is that nature, our Earth, our planet Gaia, has a living matrix, a coating that is the soil. The soil. And the soil, obviously I'm going like this because the biblical Garden of Eden had 6 feet of soil. And there's talks about even places like the Amherst Valley in Massachusetts that still have 6 feet of fertile topsoil. But a lot of places right around me here, you have virtually no soil at all, nothing, because the microbes have died out, there's no organic material, and there's not an interface of living plants to feed the microbes. So, nature's clothing is soil. When nature has no clothes on, she gets really hot in the day and really cold at night. That's like the desert. You get massive fluctuations, huge, 40, 50, 60 degree even temperature fluctuation day to night. And again, if it gets super cold in the winter still, it's not global warming, it's erratic weather. And another interesting metric is fire weather. There could be, I think there's always some degree of fires, but they're of course blamed on the climate change. But fire weather conditions are rather specific, and they are somewhat independent of temperature. They're not dependent on temperature. Fire weather conditions have to do with the moisture content of available burn materials, the relative humidity, and the dew point, and the wind. There may be one other factor, but I'm pretty sure that's it. It's not temperature. And then we have the ignition potential. So if we have increased fire weather conditions, that is indicative, once again, of instability. Because the stability, what makes a forest fire resilient is the soil. Just like what makes a tree not fall over. You'll see lots of windfall in the forest these days, and in cities and towns too. But an interesting thing about a healthy tree will never break. A healthy tree, it's wood. It can bend all over the place. Wood is so, even the hardest of woods, when it's alive and full of moisture, a tree will not break. Typically, they can. Okay, but generally, you'll see when they fall over, it's right at the root area. And they have just kind of a spread out roots, and it's flat on the bottom, and you can see there's not enough of a healthy root ball there, that the soil's gone. Really, if you think about it in that way, that it's all been reduced down. The trees are living on this barren ground of dirt instead of a healthy matrix of soil. And when they lose, when they lose that, they... So in any case, I want to wrap this up, not go too long, and tell you why am I, Joseph Gilby, talking about soil. We're always talking about soil. Why am I talking about climate change? Because I want to get shadow banned, and I want everyone to dislike me. No, it's just... there's that aspect, but really what I learned, friends, that I want to share with you is, as I've said, it's actually not that hard to regreen the desert, and it's not that hard to produce regeneratively and to turn a crappy piece of land into a beautiful piece of land. But what I ended up learning is I started to say these books were written in the 70s and 80s. The solutions have already been around. What I ended up learning is that really it's an issue. The issues are going on in here. They're going on in here. And I'll go like this because I think that we drive a wedge into ourselves, in between the left and right hemisphere of the brain, or in between the fact and the feelings, and we have to heal ourselves because there is a major situation going on with this disconnect from nature. We've heard this saying, a disconnect from nature, and it got all popular to go do the grounding, and it should be. It's great. We should take your shoes off and walk on the earth. Grounding. That's a real thing because we are an electrical being. And earthing, stuff like that. Put your hands in the soil. Yes, that's the real deal. We need to do that. We also need to do that on a massive scale where we turn the earth green again, fertile, and where it can manage the conditions and sustain life itself. Life sustains life. But also, we need to heal in here first. We need to get away from lusting and envy and jealousy and wanting to emulate the rich people. And that's kind of where I guess, let me wrap it up here before I go on too long. In my last video, why would I talk about John Kempf and Von Benjamin in the same video? John Kempf, as I said, is a brilliant luminary in the field of regenerative agriculture and eco-agriculture. Brilliant man. And John is very into technical aspects. He's very into not saying things that are not technically validated, I would say. And that is the motto of his company: test, don't guess. And they do sap analysis from plants, which is awesome. It's a great, instead of, for many people that are thinking about learning about their soil health, there's the soil health, how to test your soil tests, different types of soil tests. And the soil tests don't actually tell us what we really need to know, except John does recommend an initial soil assessment. But when you're growing crops, what John does, you take sap from the plant and then learn from that. And what we actually find a lot of times is that these things are existing in a little bit of imbalances. We need to balance the minerals, and then everything else will fall into place. So, but in general, in any case, what I wanted to wrap it up with saying, why did I mention John Kempf and go to Von Benjamin in the same video? Well, because what I was saying about Brother Von, and his philosophy, John really says the same thing. John is interested in our intuition. That's what he's interested in. And I'm not trying to put words, I'm not trying to put words in John's mouth, but I have listened to all of his podcasts a few times, many of them, and I have much respect for the man. But John is very much interested in how farmers and producers use their intuition to listen to the needs of the plants in the soil and the life around. I know that that's very much what he's interested in, as well as am I. He said this stuff doesn't all come from some factual sources of information. The book Holistic Management is great, all this other stuff about the solutions from permaculture to regenerative agriculture stuff, it's great, but we need to learn how to listen to the land. So again, to finish it out, I read a couple books recently on trauma. And I kind of realized after reading these books on trauma that it may not be possible for many people to just tap in and get connected with nature because of the hurt that we're dealing with. And we, they, us, any of us, trauma is a very real thing where you have this kind of need to develop emotionally and spiritually along with physically, and we get blockages in the flow that happen in our youth or whatever. We're all familiar with the picture. And trauma happens in varying degrees, of course, but it's really from the developmental perspective, it's really about the blockage. How much did it stop the flow of energy? Because that ends up having health consequences and relationship consequences, of course, but it has major consequences in our ability just to be receptive and tuned in. And we have to be able to go inside and heal that stuff first. And I can tell you, it's well worth it. For me, I've done many different types of work in my life, but the interpersonal work has been difficult, but the most rewarding. So, Von Benjamin, the singer of the Midnight Band, the brother's passed away now, rest in peace, but his work is majorly proliferating now. And it's really lighting a blaze in the world, because the man was a serious prophet, philosopher. Okay, but what he said all the time, is everything is going to be all right. I love right, and I live right. Because time is not counted from daylight, but from midnight. He's talking about going inside to the inner sight. Stop looking outside at the facts and the figures and the way you perceive the world. Because it all turn around when you perceive it from in here. And that's basically it. The problems around climate, and whether we're talking soil or we're talking about the debate, the argument, any of it, the problems are not actually the problems. The solutions are not actually the solutions. The reason I say that is that we have to address a little bit differently. Use the holistic thinking. Think about, basically that's the other thing is that I'm actually sure that these way disparate camps really have in our heart of hearts, I think we want the same things. I think we want a healthy world. Almost everyone. But at the same time, many people are not in a good place. Many people are full of jealousy and envy and lust and are seeking for attention because they're hurt inside. And that's the way it goes, and it always will be that way. And, I think the best thing to do in that situation, in this situation, is to try and help one another. To help one another realize that we can have a better world, but we have got to start working together. We have got to start working together. The solutions are readily available for improving the environment around us. There's no roadblock there. The solutions are readily available. If anyone wants webinars on solutions, we got them. Sitting here in a passive solar home that I pay $0 in utilities a year and next to nothing in taxes. Wow, built it myself. The paradise that we want, it's in here. It's not in there. So, thanks for listening, everybody. It's just a little introduction to the climate change stuff. A bunch of blah blah, but I hope you enjoyed it. Hawkeye speaks. Truth so tasty. From the Earthship.